and head of the Venom Evolution Laboratory at the University of Queensland. He describes himself as David Attenborough on acid, working with deadly venomous creatures in order to save lives. He believes venom may be the key in developing drugs to treat disease. He's written a new book about his unusual career called Venom Doc, the edgiest, darkest and strangest natural history memoir ever. And Dr. Fry is on the line with us from Brisbane. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, this has got to be one of the most interesting first lines in a book. There is nothing quite like agonizing withdrawal from months smashed to the gills on extremely potent opiate derivative to turn to ashes one's fire for recreational drugs. What are you describing when you start the book like that?
So what I'm talking about there is what it was like to take myself off cold turkey from months of intravenous hydromorphone when I was, which is a really potent opioid derivative, given straight into the vein here, when I was in LA for 4 months after, spectacularly breaking my back.
Oh.
Yeah, that was good times.
How did that happen?
Well, I was catching a small goanna up at the top of a nearly 4-meter termite mound, and it broke. So I had enough free fall time to think, this is going to hurt. And it did. I landed on another one about a meter off the ground when they're sort of like that parking post size, and they're like concrete at that size.
Yeah.
So I broke my back in 3 places. Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was horrible.
And
the thing that was actually worse, ironically, than the withdrawal was the early chemical cravings, because this is where I realized, what an epidemic these things are, and now they're starting to become such an epidemic in Australia and New Zealand. The short-acting opioids come with the price of, you can just feel it getting the claws into you as it gives you this great big chemical hug that insulates you from the big bad world. But what it does, as far as the brain is insane. But luckily on mine, I was in such extreme pain, they had to put me on this. But it comes with a different price in that, you're not craving it. I would forget to take it if I wasn't in pain, or forget to press the button or take a pill depending on what I was doing. But it comes at the price of absolute devastation of the hormone system. So when you have this kind of extreme pain, it takes these extreme measures. And it was only because of an ER mate of mine who sees it a lot in car accident victims, where people say like, oh yeah, it just never was the same after that injury. Well, the people who are getting these long-acting opioids, and this is actually what spurred me to write the book, wasn't about the envenomations, but about the fact that it wiped out my hormone system, my nerve growth factor, and my testosterone, which for somebody like me is deeply ironic. Okay. So, but it didn't bother me that much because I'm a insane scientist, which means that I'm not above like doing an indigenous ritual with the Indians in the Amazon, and oh wow, that was fun. Apparently, I was supposed to pass the bowl on. So these kind of number games don't bother me because it means that I just have to take bioidenticals for the rest of my life. And it's like an extreme form of male menopause, which always has all these jokes associated with it, like, what's the difference between male menopause and female menopause? Well, male menopause is a lot more fun. A man buys a sports car and dates younger women, while females get hot flashes and gain weight.
There you go.
So, but it's blithely dismissed. And I did move on to that in the book and talk about other causes. That there's all these chemicals that basically hate our bodies. Some statins, for example, because they consume the substrate that makes testosterone. Some antifungals, some antidepressants are going to turn you just into a crying mess. They destroy testosterone with variable degrees of bouncing back. In my particular case, it was absolutely wiped out, but I'm far from the first, and I've got a really good specialist endocrinologist, Dr. Russell Cooper here in Brisbane, who I have to see every few months because of this. So the most devastating thing that happened to me through all of this stuff, where we had safe houses blown up in Pakistan. I talked my way out of a kidnapping in Colombia by holding up a bag full of venomous snakes, which they thought were really cool. So maybe they were snake people when they weren't kidnapping people. But it's ironic that, the thing that hit me the hardest was actually the prescription drugs.
How come those functions don't come back? You said wiped out.
Well, it's very poorly understood. It's sort of like what happened to me, like how the book opens, where my first memory is being strapped to a hospital bed with spinal meningitis that wiped out the hearing of my ear. It's not a physical damage in my right ear. It's just like the hearing has been erased, except for this very one small fragment that's still left, a really narrow spectrum of perfect hearing. The audiologists haven't seen anything like it, but it's erased completely on either side. So, no, we don't know a lot of these things, and particularly because men are stupid. We don't talk about our own health. If women have an issue, some very intense lunches are scheduled, lots of white wine is drunk, and things are sorted out.
They talk.
But the only time men talk about this is like saying at someone's funeral, yeah, Gaza died of nut cancer.
Oh, dear. Now, why did you decide to write this book? I mean, it's
Well,
obviously a great
this is the
stories
real
in there,
crux
but
of
there's
it.
also research and things to be known medically that could help us in the future, I take it.
Oh, definitely. No, to raise awareness also on the conservation side. Like when my students ask me, how do we get people to, want to conserve and to realize the importance? I say that your weakest argument is to talk about how beautiful and wonderful creature X, Y, or Z is, because the only people who are going to appreciate that are the ones who already think that way. You need to point out things like captopril. It's been one of the top 20 drugs of all time. Here we are 40 years after its invention, and it's still a $10 billion a year market. This wonder drug is a modified snake toxin.
What does that do?
So it's for high blood pressure. If you know of anyone taking high blood pressure medication, odds are they've taken this somewhere along the lines. It has been the most effective for, not all high blood pressure, of course, is the same. So but for a major general type of, this is really, really a great great hypertensive drug. So we also have painkillers from cone snails. So I say that, you have to point out that these things are an economic resource, because otherwise chopping down the forest is no different than popping a nuke on the oil fields. You're destroying an economic resource. We just happen to like this more than we would backstroking through oil.
Venomous creatures, we're sort of quite often scared of them. Excuse me. Most people
good reason they kill.
Yeah, I know that. But it seems, though, that we're sort of almost hardwired, to be afraid. Or is it something we learn? I've always wondered about that.
I reckon it's more learned, because we're completely removed from this as any kind of selection pressure. We live in this artificial world that we separate ourselves willfully from nature. And that's why, like, if you look through the growth of literature, when the Industrial Revolution hit, nature stopped being portrayed as something that people participated in, and it became demonized and afraid. That's when monster literature really takes off. But you've always had those things. Every religion has some sort of terrible creature, involved in it. Because yes, it does kill, but the biggest thing is the unknown. So that's why, like, when I give reptile talks to schools and such, the younger the child at the assembly, the more likely they're going to be rushing straight up to this big olive python with a great big grin on their face.
Yeah.
But you see this learnt fear, and then you see some people who just lose their minds, and you ask them, and most of the time they've had no personal experience. Now, the biggest irony of this is that my agent, Margaret Gee in Sydney, when she was 9, her twin sister and their best mate were both bit by a big brown snake, and when they were living in rural Victoria during a picnic. And that actually scarred her. So she won't even look at pictures in my book, and parts of it were just terrifying for her to read. I know this is terribly ironic, but she's very much the minority. Most people have had no encounter. So nature is something to be conquered or vanquished, but it's to our ironic cultural, not just cultural loss, but economic loss. That if we appreciate nature as something to be respected and treasured, that if we took better care of it than we do, and certainly better care than we do with our banking system, that this is an economic resource that will have benefits for indefinite periods of time. This is the golden goose, but it's also something that people like me actually just really enjoy going out into, and it's healthy. Like, there's a study that looked at the average eucalyptus national park in Australia and found nearly 700 chemicals, about a half of which were known to be beneficial to the immune system. So if you live among the trees, you can be healthier. Like, that's why, like, your rural kids aren't the immunological wasteland that your city kids are. You don't get those level of allergies, or they become allergic to everything, and that's due to the hygiene hypothesis of they're too clean as kids.
Yeah.
Kids need to be around in some pig shit every now and then, and they'll have a better life in all ways.
Yeah, no, I think there was some research in the news in the last week or so showing that kids who grew up on farms actually had a lot less allergies than kids who didn't.
If we participate in nature, we're healthier. So therefore, nature is good for us.
So as a young person, I know you moved around a lot as a child. Did you keep any of these venomous animals as snakes? How were you initially exposed to them, I guess, is my question.
Well, so once I was released from the hospital as an infant after spinal meningitis, I'd be looking at my mom's photo albums, because she grew up the daughter of UN diplomats from Norway. So it's like pictures of like gaboon vipers on her tennis court when they were living in Africa, or black mambas, and when they had one on the curtain rods. I grew up and they had these giant python skins in the studies, that they had got from the markets during their time in Africa. One of which actually the villagers killed it behind their house. So I got exposed to all of that. Plus, my dad was in the U.S. military, so we were traveling all the time. So everywhere we went, I'd be out there trying to catch whatever lay beneath. So, and my parents were really cool about it. What certainly wasn't a career they had thought of. They weren't big fans of snakes, but they were big fans of us doing well, and they figured the best way to that is our passion, which is good because in many families it could have gone something along the lines of the boy is deranged. We need to see a psychiatrist. I told you not to drink during pregnancy.
Okay. Well, you describe snakes, for example, as sociopaths.
Well, they are in the sense that, when they're predating, any predator, has, in basic psychology, you have a lot of overlap between like, narcissist or sociopath or psychopath or predator. And, predators aren't something we use in the human category. So, we have to sort of bring it into our understanding of human nature for people to get what I'm talking about. But when they're hunting, they're probing for weaknesses in an absolutely merciless way. The way that like if a sociopath fixates on somebody, and that's the difference between a psycho and a sociopath. As a psycho bites everything, a sociopath, bites sort of in a search way.
Targets, yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. So that actually makes some of these animals easier to work with because our abiding goal is to catch it without damaging it, because we just spent a lot of money finding one after years of looking. Besides, we like them. Why would we want to hurt them? Also, we need it to be healthy for it to be the resource, so for all the right reasons, and also safety, that an enraged animal is a much more dangerous animal. So we have to understand the animals in order to sort of, all right, what's going to piss them off and what's going to keep them calm. And then we try to do like the Sun Tzu thing of give him an opening, but one of our choosing, of how can we trap this animal with minimum distress to it and minimum danger to us. What is our most, and that's where most of my bites have occurred, is working with something in the wild the very first time, because once you know a species of snake, you have a pretty good idea of what it's physically capable of based on its morphology. But if you're working with it for the first time, like how I got bit by one of the sea snakes, we found one that was unusually hard muscled, and it struck up straight out of the bin about 1.5 feet and got me that way, which is something a lot of land snakes would struggle to do.
So you weren't expecting that?
No, that was new knowledge.
Now, I'm going to ask you about the bites real soon, because you've had a few. But one thing that I'm really interested in asking you about is the level of intelligence of these animals, because reading through some of the notes in the book, some of these animals are very smart and they're very aware. Am I right in that?
Yeah, and these the ones that are the clueiest are the ones that are your sight feeders, not like your venomous landmines like a death adder, or just belligerent general stupidity like a brown snake. Brown snakes are not clever animals, but taipans are very clever because those massive eyes, they're having to process visual information. That's they have to make decisions based on interpretation. That's requiring a bit of higher level thinking.
So what are they looking for?
Well, exactly. It's going to be what is their specialty. So in the case of a taipan, it's looking for rats and stalking rats, very dangerous prey animal that could severely injure or kill a taipan. So they have to be, they're playing a very dangerous game because they're a specialist, a unique specialist on very dangerous prey, versus brown snakes just take anything small and helpless it can come across. It's a bully feeder, so it doesn't have to be as clever.
And the cobra too. There's a sort of way they do
not
things.
All of them. You're smaller. Basically, the smaller and shorter lived they are, they're not going to be as cluey. But your very large, long-lived animals like king cobras are going to be very, very smart. And they are. There is another sight feeder. They hang up in the trees looking for other snakes, spot it, glide down from the tree, stalk it, and attack it. And sometimes they're feeding on other venomous snakes, so they need to do the perfect attack. And it's sort of like the intelligence studies that have been done in Phoenutria, or not Phoenutria, but Portia, the largest of the jumping spiders. It can look at something, disappear, work its way out of sight where it can't see either, pop out exactly where it needs to be, and attack. So it has that fourth dimensional thinking. So there's been some extraordinary studies done on these little venomous spiders. So, this kind of animal behavior, though, we're interacting with it and trying not to get killed ourselves in the process, because, mates of mine have gotten killed by these snakes.
Now, you've been bitten so many times. I don't know really where you want to start. Maybe with the most severe bite.
Well, the most severely mentally traumatizing was Stevens bandit, where it destroyed the ability of my blood to clot entirely. And I was bleeding out. It was like stigmata. I was bleeding out of my eyes, and mouth, and can't come into work today. Sorry, no, my stomata's acting up.
Got a
But,
really good
that was
doctor's
kind of
note.
cool
Yeah.
in a really terrifying sort of way. But then once I started bleeding out of my butt, life was by definition a
Yeah.
lot less cool. I don't
Yes.
care how you get to anal bleeding in life. Once you get there, it's not cool by
Okay.
any insane definition.
I believe you.
So that was the scariest because I'm thinking I'll bleed into my brain, and then it'd be like running a hose over a dirt embankment. You're going to cause some physical erosion that's going to have some permanent, wildly unpredictable effect.
Wow.
And that's
Okay.
terrifying. That
So
is the loneliest place on earth,
it's
is to
like
be in a
getting a
hospital bed with one of those.
like getting a bowler almost.
Well, yeah, and so those are the scariest kind of bites. The neurotoxic ones are either going to be a bad LSD trip, like my first snake bite was, a rattlesnake bite that fries the nerves in a really unpleasant way, where lost my ability to see color. I only saw shades of yellow from white to black with shades of yellow in between. And then basically I went into the full exorcist after that. Versus something like a death adder, which has an effect similar to some of the cobras, which is why Cleopatra killed herself with a cobra, not a puff adder, because you die screaming at the puff adder. But with some of these cobra style snakes, you get a euphoria, and this is why these things are being so intensively investigated for painkillers.
Yeah.
Closer you get to death, the higher you are. I had a complete out-of-body experience. It was awesome. It felt like eons I was drifting through time and space. I was actually a bit pissed when they harshed my buzz and brought me down with the antivenom. Thank you for saving my life, but I was having a good time.
Yeah. So venom and the use of venom and predation has been around, since the beginning of time?
Yeah, that's one of the main uses. Then you also get it in use for defense, like bees, but then you also get it in competitor deterrence, like male platypus do this male-male combat during the breeding season. And this is when they're dangerous to humans, just the males during the breeding, just like male funnel webs when they leave the burrows and stop feeding, but now are exposed to vertebrate predators. Well, with the male platypus, it's also the best example of male stupidity when showing off for a female, because they stab each other with this incredibly painful venom until one of them goes away, and the female is just shaking her head and thinking, I'm going to go extinct. This is what we have to go through to keep the species alive. But it's no different than you see guys showing off to women in bars, or hey, here, hold my beer for a sec, and then doing something worthy of the Darwin Awards.
Now, snakes and spiders, also lizards and jellyfish are venomous. Let's look at lizards. The one that freaks me out is the big Komodo dragon, and I think you've had some experience with that. Tell us about that. That's a big lizard, like up to 3 meters,
Yeah,
right?
these things are massive, and but they're not the biggest to have lived. They're only the third biggest. They're no different than the common goanna in Australia, the lace monitor. So they're just a big predator of a certain clade of giant lizards that have a characteristically serrated tooth. And Komodos evolved actually in Australia and Queensland to predate on small megafauna, while the two bigger species successively took bigger ones. So Komodos evolved to take like 40, 50 kilo animals. The next one up, about 100 kilo, and then the giant 7.5 meter megalania, things up to 200-300 kilo. So they do this through a bite and slice, where we've shown that they slice through the teeth. Mechanical damage will kill about 70% of the prey in the first 30 minutes, just like a shock wound. But we've shown that they're using venom to keep them going bleeding for another 3 to 4 hours, and then they succumb that way. So that gives them a competitive advantage, because it's now a 90% aggregate prey kill rate, which is higher than a great white or a lion. But there's been all this enchanting fairy tale stuff about Komodos and toxic bacteria, but it's been pretty simple. We've shown all this time that water buffalo aren't from there. Dutch settlers brought them there about 300 years ago. The only water available to them are stagnant, rocky watering holes full of their own feces. They don't recognize a Komodo as a predator because the big monitor lizard where they live, the Asian water monitor, doesn't take animals anywhere near the size of a water buffalo, but Komodos will have an opportunistic go at anything, just like a shark. So they go and they stand in their own crap in boiling heat, disgusting water. If you sliced your leg with a sterile scalpel, went and stood on it, you'd have the same sort of bacteriological hell that happens to them. This is basic bacteriology. So it's been a fundamental misreading all this time of that ecology.
In fact, you say that the Komodo dragon has a very clean mouth. It spends a long time and a lot of attention to doing that.
Exactly. They do a lot of lip licking and rubbing of their head in the leaves, and so they're actually much cleaner than your average carnivore, or even the typical 5-year-old kid chewing on another one, like Luis Suarez having another mental breakdown.
And you also say that they too are always looking for the moment that is going to work for them, right? They're using their intelligence all the time as well.
Yeah. They hide around the game trails and spring out, like where one of our field sites is in Rincha Island. A young boy was killed there when he went to take use the toilet in the bathroom in the long grass, and while he was squatted down, a big Komodo came and got him behind the leg and wrapped the teeth around the front part too, sliced him so deep it cut all the way through the femoral artery. So his first blood spurt was about 2 meters. And then it grabbed him mid-body and caved his head in against a tree and ran off with the uncles chasing him. So that kid was dead, in seconds.
Right.
That shows the physical, formidable prowess of these animals. But if things don't go that way, the venom will keep it bleeding, and you'll get another 20% will drop off of that get away.
Right.
So so only 10% escape, but water buffalo have a 100% escape rate because they're just too big.
Yeah.
So it's been a man-made artificial scenario all this time.
And it's sort of developed into a way of thinking of how they operate, which is completely wrong.
Oh yeah, with a million staged documentaries that purport to show a reality that they didn't actually see. No one has ever documented the same Komodo following an infected water buffalo around and then benefiting from it, being actually in on the feed. Nature does not run a charity. And bacteria as a weapon, it would be extraordinary, and we've shown that it's not the case. And it's amazing it became so entrenched because there's that classic scientific statement that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that simply was not here, which ironically led to it being overlooked all this time that they were using venom.
You just mentioned documentaries there, and I sort of detected a little bit of a sound in your voice when you mentioned them. But you've been involved in many yourself. Obviously, you want to be involved with documentaries that are credible. Who have you worked with?
All the channels, and now it's down to, through a ruthless process of elimination, there's only some that I'll work with in only certain conditions. And of course, BBC and Nat Geo are two of the top ones, but then there's good initiatives that are coming up, like Science Channel and Smithsonian Channel in the US, and that like what Paul Willis is doing in Australia of massive communication and science outreach through various channels, and including digital streaming of that. So there's a lot more that can be done as far as with the technology. There's a lot more citizen science can be done, and there's no reason why researchers can't stop filming themselves, because it's cheap now to do it. It's not like how it was before. So I think that we'll see a lot more high quality documentaries through independent channels, particularly because we have definitely entered the age of me, and everyone wants their proverbial 15 minutes of fame, and good on them, I say, because if that's what motivates people to work hard, that's great, and let's make science, accessible and sexy.
So in terms of medical advances and treatments, what could come from all this research, all this knowledge on venom? Are there any, miracle cures sitting there waiting to be discovered?
Oh, definitely. And that's why we need to conserve these animals, because the more we look, the more we're finding. And here we have millions and millions of years of evolution at its nastiest, which means, ultra smart bomb precision, yet extreme potency. These are very rare combinations.
He's a rare guy, all right. Dr. Bryan Greig Fry, venomologist is his official designation. He's from the Venom Evolution Laboratory at the University of Queensland. He's been bitten over 25 times. He described a couple of them there. Black and white vision and hearing going and all of that. Don't try it at home. And always wanted to find out about the Komodo dragon. I think I'll be able to sleep easier now that I've equipped with that knowledge that they're not as, full of bacteria as I